I wanted to ask you about three things. One, the Iran deal, as far as we know about it. Isolated point, or focus on one point. It seems they think that they can go ahead and enrich anytime they want, and we think they can't, going from Kerry's statements yesterday and the Iranian foreign minister yesterday.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, look, there's the fundamental thing here is you've left in place the technology and the capability to, at any point you want, build a weapon. And so, and I think also we need to understand that this is a regime that has always had clandestine and secret sites. So a lot to be learned here. I think what we need to ask ourselves is, I'm interested in learning more about what is the verification systems that have been put in place, because of these inspectors are not allowed to go in and see more than what they're seeing now, and I mean significantly more. I think that's problematic. I think the second point is, what happens is at some point here over the next few months we discover another secret facility in which Iran is conducting parts of its weapons program. But the most troubling part of it all is that the history in recent times tells us that anytime you roll back sanctions, they're very difficult to reimpose, because these sanctions partially require banks and other private sector entities around the world to want to comply with them, to want to move forward with them voluntarily. There's only so much you can do to them if they fail to do so. I think now that the news headlines say the sanctions have been partially rolled back, it's going to be very difficult to restart them in the future. In fact, it now creates momentum in the opposite direction, and I think imperils the entire sanctions regime, which I think depends on the compliance voluntarily sometimes by outside entities. So I think this is a big win. I hate to say it for Iran. I think they've taken a step forward in solidifying their position, and I think we've seen this play out before. This is very, very similar to what the North Koreans did at the end of the Bush presidency, and we've seen repeating again. It's a playbook we've seen before.
We're talking to Senator Marco Rubio from Florida, of course. Senator Rubio, the Israelis are distraught. Fuad Ajami was telling us earlier, one interesting thing, ironic, is the closeness, at least on this issue, of the Saudis and the Israelis now. Do you, A, what do you make of that? And B, is it more likely or less likely that Israel strikes now?
Well, I don't want to speculate on what Israel is going to decide. Certainly, they're more insecure than they did before this happened. I think from a Saudi perspective, I think they start to seriously consider taking steps for their own weapons and their own weapons system, which they could purchase, quite frankly, if that's what they wanted to do. And I think it just makes the Middle East a more dangerous place. So there are repercussions to this that need to be thought through, and I think there are two of them right there.
Do you have any notion about whether this was pushed because the president is saying, there are other things we should be worried about to get people's attention off health care?
No, I wouldn't say that. I mean, this has been brewing for quite a while. I do think it was pushed by the desire to have achievements in foreign policy and to be able to show for it. I think they view it as a legacy issue. I think they view it as a way to delay military action for 2 to 3 years, knowing that if in the future Iran breaks out towards a weapons system, it will be someone else's problem. It's probably too far to say they're doing it simply to distract from Obamacare. A, because I don't think it will. I think that Obamacare is still a reality to people in their daily lives in ways Iran still is not. And second, I mean, this has been some time coming. This is a serious issue. It's a legitimate issue that needs to be faced and confronted. I just don't think this is the right approach.
Yeah, I don't mean to be paranoid, but what's the saying? Even paranoids have enemies, and one worries about these things. Let's go to another one then, which is the nuclear option, not actual nuclear bombs, but what's called the nuclear option. Harry Reid's action here. You remember the Senate. What about this? This is pretty old, venerable tradition.
Well, I mean, look, we have a constitutional obligation to advise and consent, which means, and one of the reasons why, for example, these judges are lifetime appointments. People don't realize these are not cabinet people or even ambassadors. I mean, they're there for the rest of their lives as long as they want to stay on the bench, and they make very significant decisions. And the president's handled most of a vast majority of his confirmations that he's asked for. There are a few he hasn't gotten for reasons that are legitimate. This is something Harry Reid's been threatening to do for a while. I think they're going to regret it in the long term. The filibuster is still in place for legislation and other measures, but I think this is a step backwards for the Senate. This is hypocrisy, by the way, because this is something Harry Reid and Barack Obama and Joe Biden and others, when they were in the minority or when they were in the Senate, opposed making changes to. But, this is kind of the way politics is now run by the Democrats in the Senate. It's kind of a power play, and very short-sighted, and it's all about changing the rules, as you see them doing in Obamacare, breaking the rules in order to change the rules. They're doing it with Obamacare. They've done it in the Senate. This is part of the course.
Risk corridors. What's the risk to us of the risk corridor?
Well, let me explain what it is, because in concept, there's nothing. It's an acceptable practice. It basically is like a reinsurance that tells insurance companies, if you make a terrible decision based on assumptions that you didn't anticipate for that period of time, we'll make up for some of the losses you have for that shortened period of time. But that relies on a balanced insurance marketplace where most of the companies are making their profits, and maybe one or two, because you don't want them to collapse, you come in and help for a short period of time. They're paying into this fund to fund it. The problem is, with it applied to Obamacare, is Obamacare and the exchanges has basically become the equivalent of a high-risk pool. The people who are signing up for it now because of changes that have been made are those who are guaranteed to use insurance. All of these companies every company probably has significantly underpriced the premiums. The result is that all of them are going to be asking for money out of the high-risk corridor, and it's going to be, out of these corridors, and it's going to be, tens of millions of dollars that the taxpayers will have to fund for this. This puts us all on the hook, and it's for 3 years. So it's a big deal. The risk is to the taxpayer of a massive cash transfer from the federal government into the hands of private insurers because the exchanges are collapsing.
And Senator Rubio, do I understand this correctly? This does not require separate appropriation action by the House or Senate?
It's authorized in the bill. And the administration's taken that position, that they don't necessarily need to come back and make any changes. And obviously these insurers are caught between a rock and a hard place. They've agreed to certain premiums based on certain assumptions that are no longer true. They know they're going to take a bath on this thing. They're not going to get all their money back and through the risk corridors, but they're going to get a lot of it back. And that's taxpayer money that's now going to basically bail out the exchanges.
But is this a noble but quixotic action on our part? I mean, the president won't sign your bill, right? He won't.
I think once people realize that there are hundreds of millions of dollars being poured in order to save these exchanges, and that the exchanges are being bailed out, I think there's going to be a tremendous amount of anger and resentment and rebellion and call to action, including among Democrats. We've seen that now on a couple things they said was non-negotiable. Once the reality becomes reality to real people, they look for cover pretty quickly.
This is a way to cover against the adverse selection, is that right? And the death spiral?
In terms of, but it's not supposed to be, and it's supposed to be basically as an insurance in case one or two insurers, had some unique thing happen that has thrown off their plan, and they don't have time to readjust. But it was not designed to basically. It's going to apply to every company. I mean, every company out there has constructed their premiums based on assumptions of who they were going to be insuring that are no longer true. And that's why this is a guarantee now of a huge cash transfer.
Let me ask you this, because I don't understand this. One of the arguments that people make is, you're seeing the unhappiness now, but you'll see happiness later as all these people come into the system who have not had insurance before. We're trying to get the number, but we think most of the people who are coming in are Medicaid or were Medicaid eligible. And if they're coming in and getting Medicaid, which is not that great a program.
Well, and especially in certain states where it's a fee-for-service program and the care is not managed and not coordinated well. But here's the way to analyze this. There are going to be winners and losers because at the end of the day, Obamacare is as much about redistribution as it is anything else. And the problem is that there are a handful of people that don't have insurance that now may get it very cheaply or free. And that might be a significant number of Americans. But the vast majority of people are either going to pay higher premiums, have lost the coverage that they're happy with, can no longer see the doctors they used to see, have lost their jobs or hours at work because of Obamacare, have seen their existing premiums go up and their employer-required mandate. Most Americans a vast majority of Americans are going to be worse off under Obamacare, not better off. And so that's why I think this law just will not be able to stand the test of time here. One
of the arguments I've heard, last question on that, we'll let you go. Again, thanks for staying with us, is that it will be about an even number who will be happy and even number unhappy. You said vast majority. 3 to 1?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I can't tell you it's 4 to 1, 5 to 1, or 3 to 1, but I think it's going to be a significant number, quite frankly, because the implications of Obamacare go beyond just your insurance plan. It goes to your patient-doctor relationship. Yep. It'll go to your job, your paycheck, your hours, all these things. You put them together, most Americans are not going to be happy with the way this thing turns out.
Yeah, it's going to create anxiety generally. We had a guy who called and said that he sells, policies for Medicare. All his Medicare people are terrified.
Well, and as they should be. This is a massive disruption in what represents about a sixth of our economy.
Thank you, Senator Rubio.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.